Welcome to Nature Unheard. I'm Emma, and I'm here to bring you stories of resilience, of curiosity, and insights from groundbreaking ideas. Now, have you ever wondered how much a forest is really worth? If fish could talk, what would they say about our rivers? And can AI save biodiversity where humans can't? Join Adonai, Rachel, and me along with experts on our journey, from Jordan to Kazakhstan, Kenya to the UK, as we dive deep into the natural world.
Nature Unheard is a podcast
by the EBRD.
Hi Rachel, I have to confess, I am running purely on 2 bananas and a hint of anxiety today. I don't know what happened, but I could not wake up this morning.
Oh, I totally get that. I almost overslept too, and normally my children are the most reliable alarm clocks in the world. Today I think we all wanted to stay in bed, but fortunately I knew I had to be up, so I'd set alarms on both of my phones just in case.
Confession, my biggest fear about having children is being rudely awakened at some godforsaken hour by a tiny, sticky-fingered human. I can barely manage it at 8. Maybe, no, okay, 10. Anyways, today we're diving into something that feels very nature unheard. We're talking about how technology is helping us hear nature in ways we've never been able to before.
And also how not everyone gets access to these tools yet, which is a huge problem when the stakes are climate change, biodiversity, and people's livelihoods.
Exactly. Because I feel like on one side, you've got incredible innovations, AI that can detect pests in trees, drones monitoring biodiversity, and sensors listening to forests breathe.
And I was just at COP30 in Brazil and heard about so many new digital innovations, like AI agricultural advice provided through WhatsApp.
Wow.
But on the other side, entire regions, Tajikistan, rural Jordan, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, are still struggling with basic connectivity. So you get this widening digital divide right at the moment we need technology most.
For years, I think we've talked about how developing countries could leapfrog technologies. For example, skipping from landlines and going straight to mobile networks.
Yeah, and sometimes that still works. But digital tech is evolving so fast, and it requires reliable power, strong data systems, training, and resources that aren't evenly distributed. So leapfrogging is getting harder.
Well, that is where today's story comes in, because some innovations do manage to cross that divide, and they show what's possible when technology and nature actually meet on equal terms.
And the example we're starting with today feels almost poetic, given the name of this podcast.
As our listeners should know, we are Nature Unheard, and this next story is all about giving nature a voice, or at least learning to listen to one that it already had.
So let's go to the team behind Palmear, who have developed a way to hear what's happening inside a palm tree before it's too late.
It's mad that technology can enable us to listen to a tree.
Well, let's go ahead and listen.
We often imagine nature as silent, but the earth has been speaking all along. Trees, soil, fish, even the mighty sperm whale. Every part of the living world produces sound as it grows, moves, or comes under stress. A whale sends low-frequency pulses across entire oceans. Healthy soil crackers with the tiny movements of insects and microorganisms. And inside a palm tree, when an invasive pest starts feeding it, it produces faint, rhythmic clicks, a warning signal before any damage is visible. Most of these sounds are far beyond human hearing. Yet, with sensitive acoustic sensors and AI-powered acoustic intelligence, we can now detect and interpret them with scientific clarity. We can turn hidden vibrations into real diagnosis, insight that let us intervene early before ecosystems tipped into decline. In Egypt and Jordan, this ability to hear inside trees is helping farmers identify destructive pests such as the red palmear early enough to save entire date palm groves and protect livelihoods. It's a new way of understanding nature, not by watching for symptoms, but by listening to its internal signals. This isn't about giving nature a new voice. It's about decoding the one it already has in frequencies we've ignored for too long. Nature is speaking, pulses, patterns, and data. AI lets us hear it, but action is still our responsibility. The Earth is speaking, it's time to respond.
That was fascinating. It really shows how powerful technology can be in supporting green development, but also how crucial it is that these innovations are accessible and affordable. Digital inequality isn't just about internet speeds. It affects livelihoods, resilience to climate change, and even something as fundamental as protecting your local environment. Today, we're asking, how do we make sure digital innovation works for everyone, not just those with the latest tools? To help us explore that, we're joined by Reina Otsuka, Lead for Digital Innovation for Nature and Climate at the United Nations Development Program. Hi, Reina. Glad to be here with you.
Same here.
So you have a really cool title. What does the Lead for Digital Innovation for Nature and Climate do?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's actually my dream job. So I'm very honored to be in this position. So we have, at UNDP, we do have a fairly big environmental portfolio. There's around 750 projects running at any given time for the past many years. We work in over 140 countries and territories. And my role is to mainstream digital technology and digital interventions into the environmental projects that UNDP is implementing with countries. Some parts of me is to develop scalable products. So we would develop some digital public goods. We also have a role to, again, mainstreaming. So, we do webinars, and we also try to issue guidance notes so that colleagues around the world can program digital into their nature or biodiversity, climate change projects that they have.
It's a really impressive global challenge, isn't it? I was in Sierra Leone recently, and I saw a really inspiring example of how digital was being used to promote investment in nature. They were doing a mangrove replanting project and using an app to track and tokenize each tree and to monitor the planting and growth of it. And it worked really well there because it was near a city, so they had great access to energy, to mobile networks. But that's not always the case, obviously. So can you explain a little bit how lack of this digital infrastructure access can impact the environmental resilience of developing regions?
Sure. Just to talk about a bit of example where, I was in Rwanda for 3 years, 2017 to 2020, and we did a hackathon, for climate early warning or climate resilience with farmers and young engineers in the country using IoT sensors and mobile phones. And, we noticed how farmers, not only did not have smartphones, they also didn't have access to stable electricity. So they're very selective on what they want to use on their mobile phone because of the electricity issue. So, we had to kind of change the design of our solution based on this knowledge. And I think I agree with you, it's not just about internet connectivity, it's really about access to energy when, 600 million people in Africa still don't have stable access to electricity. And also, in current days, there's lots of interest on artificial intelligence, but lack of computing power is becoming another issue that's starting. And also access to technology and capacity. And all of these really hinder when we want to use digital technology for things like early warning, where you need to disseminate the information on weather, agriculture, advisory, and I'm sure you know much more than me on this. And then also monitoring for things like poaching, illegal logging, or conflict between wildlife and human. Also, a lot of times environmental projects work on livelihood or alternative livelihoods so that, local communities don't have to rely too much on the natural resource. And for those, it's really important to have access to market. And again, if you don't have digital access, a lot of these things won't be able to happen.
So you mentioned capacity and digital access, and A lot of what you're talking about there sounds like an infrastructure problem almost. We need to connect people to the wires for electricity or the remote distributed renewables, or we need to connect people to telecoms. But what about the democratization of meaningful access to giving people the skills to use the technology once we've connected these communities? Is that important? And how can we make sure that these tools can be used by the people who need to use them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, digital literacy for, of course, policymakers and communities, general public, that's very important, as you say, for meaningful use of technology. But we also need the technical capacity, right, in universities or in the youth population and the business sectors, because UNDP advocates for open source, open data, open algorithms, just as many other international organizations do, because we want to democratize this technology for good use. But when we do that, it's also important that, you need to have the power to intake these technology. And that goes back to, it might be about education. It's also about working with local communities or local businesses through partnerships so that we can build the local capacity through technology transfer or trainings at the same time.
So UNDP sounds really well suited for that sort of structure. What about other international organizations like EBRD, the investment banks, other MDBs? How can we help this cause, supporting the digital infrastructure and the access?
From UNDP side, we're always envious of EBRD and the banks because you have much more power to bring in these real technology infrastructure, right? But I think, where we can put our forces together is a little bit more decentralized approach. Can we bring mini-grid investments together with digital access and also with market access, right? Like when you put in mini-grids, you also want to have agriculture production and also give them direct access to urban markets through digital technology. And so I think it will be great to collaborate between the different types of organizations. By the way, EBRD and UNDP already work very closely on something called the Digital for Climate Working Group. We work also with World Bank and UNFCCC, and each of us have slightly different parts that we play, where EBRD has a very cool energy digital measurement reporting and verification, we call the MRV tool, where you can do real-time monitoring of energy. And UNDP works on the national carbon registries and also, local capacity building. And the World Bank supports international data exchange. So I think we all have roles to play. And, putting those strengths together, we can really reach a much bigger population and impact.
Bridging the operational divides as well as the digital divides.
Yes.
It's really interesting to me because I feel like there's often been a conflict between science and technology and nature, and we see or hear about cases where development is bad for nature. It's crowding out nature in many ways and displacing local knowledge and local ways of living. But here we're talking about the exact opposite, basically, how this digital technology and expanding of very high-tech energy-oriented infrastructure can enable improvements to nature. Can that traditional knowledge be integrated with these digital innovations?
I mean, yes, and I think it's about how. For UNDP, we're approaching this through a digital public infrastructure lens. When we say DPI, it's not a physical infrastructure. We're talking about a soft infrastructure, such as digital ID or digital payment systems and data exchange, right? These are the foundational digital public infrastructure, which are soft work. And how we are approaching this, we're trying to use data exchange, DPI, as a potential for mainstreaming environmental data into economic and financial decisions. So as a public infrastructure, if there's a way that the government can show environmental data on like biodiversity health or soil health, climate, all of those information in a consumable way, then it becomes easier for banks or financial institutions, businesses to consume it and use it for their daily decision making. So when we do this, what we think is important is to have indigenous people and, marginalized groups of people, different types of people, to be a part of the governance and design of such system, so that when you set up the metadata, right? Without going into too much technical detail, you can have a way to, record traditional knowledge next to scientific knowledge. You could also make sure there's a data governance so that indigenous knowledge doesn't get exploited by mistake, right? We want to make sure there's access and benefit sharing across these knowledge as well. So I think, by mainstreaming it into these mainstream digital public infrastructure, we do have an opportunity to make sure that nature is at the heart of development and of economic growth. And that's really where UNDP's Nature Pledge is really trying to get to, by shifting the way we value nature, how economy and finance works, as well as policy and practice.
So can you share some more examples with us? I loved the Rwanda example. Where else have you found really good success or innovations in how you can engage with communities and use digital technology to transform the way they interact with their environment locally and with the wider world?
Sure. For example, Papua New Guinea, there's a simple app for NGOs and local communities to report on biodiversity data. And because Papua New Guinea has, high illiteracy rates, they made an app so that you don't have to be able to read it, and you can also record it by voice and pictures. And that really engaged a lot of local communities to report on their data and use it for their own reporting purpose. But also, I heard that it's used for national green fund of decisions as well. Similar citizen science also exists in, for example, Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, as far as I know. In Tanzania, I really like this one. The city of Tanga, we partnered with a foundation that uses this digital technology to support the work with informal waste pickers. And so the waste pickers can upload how much waste they collected over time. And that builds up their credit so that they can get better deals for loans. So that's also kind of financial inclusion, while actually also contributing to the circular economy. Costa Rica, I know there's a beekeeping farmer that used IoT sensors to monitor and manage honey production. And also there's indigenous communities in Brazil and Ecuador that use drones for, mapping of territory and monitoring forests, and also using apps like Mapeo, which is an open source app for mapping of indigenous territories. And some of these were funded through the Jeff UNDP Small Grants Program, which means these were really bottom-up projects that local communities came with their own ideas. And I think this, decentralized innovation and bottom-up innovation is really driving the agenda forward.
That is really exciting. I have to say, EBRD has recently invested an equity investment in a company that uses drones and satellites and other remote sensing to monitor tree health. We're helping them expand into one of our country's operation. So the digital divide is narrowing to some degree. But as we're moving into sub-Saharan Africa, I think we're just particularly excited about all the opportunities, the types of projects you've just outlined that might work in our new countries of operation. With that in mind, can you tell me a little bit about some emerging technologies that really have the potential to bring this gap even closer together?
Sure. I mean, it's difficult not to mention AI, I guess. Artificial intelligence can bring automation. So, automation of detection of change in the environment or flagging when there's illegal activities. It's also about different ways of analyzing everything from environmental data to policy documents. So I think in the science world, scientists have been using machine learning to analyze images from camera traps for ages. But I think it's really the recent advancement that made it much faster and likely cheaper to do this kind of analysis. So I think the hope here is to democratize the use, as we discussed earlier. But at the same time, I do think it's not just about the technology. We recently partnered with X Prize for their Rainforest Challenge. And I was there in the Amazon forest where 6 finalist teams were measuring the biodiversity in the forests, which was 100 hectares within 24 hours, which is really rapid, and then turning back an assessment within 48 hours. And this was really impressive, but it was a combination of not only AI, with drones, camera traps, acoustic sensors, light sensors, LiDAR, and of course, cheaper satellite data. And so it might not be about the technology itself. Some of these technology existed for a while, but it's about how we combine them toward a cause and also having mechanisms that can help change behaviors, right? Like biodiversity credits, for example. That's a very interesting new mechanism which technology can potentially support to accelerate. So I think, it's really a combination. And I do want to caution that digital technology comes with negative environmental impact. Of course, not to mention the GHG emission, right? Our ICT sector now accounts for, I think, 1.5 to 4%, depending on what scientific paper you read on global emission. And for developing countries, more immediate issues are e-waste management, or it could be about the mining impact and water scarcity. So I do think we want to be, of course, mindful and cautious about this negative impact and have ways to mitigate this or use it with caution, I must say.
I was going to say, I've definitely seen camera traps before, right? We've watched nature documentaries. These are not new technologies. It's interesting you point out, though, that part of it is the integration of these technologies in a way we've not used them before. But part of it you mentioned is the cost. Satellite data is now cheaper. Can you talk just a tiny bit more about some of these low-cost digital tools that communities are using to protect their natural resources?
Sure. Again, drones are really popular, I must say. Of course, not all countries allow drones. I'm always happily surprised to see how many indigenous communities have experience in using drones and flying it for, again, monitoring from the sky, but also in some cases dropping seedlings, for example. So there's different ways of using these. And LiDAR data as well, I think the cost has really dropped now. So it's much more easier to create three-dimensional imagery from on the coastal lines, for example, or it could also look at the Amazon forest and look at the canopy, and not just the canopy, but how it's actually degraded inside the forest. So these are the types of technologies that we see. Again, not everybody has access, and that's always an issue that we just cannot forget. But at the same time, there's a lot of interest. And again, I think it's a combination of sustainability, so not just dropping off the technology, but having a way that the local communities can continue to use it and have some kind of livelihood opportunities out of it so that they can continue to sustain and maintain the use of these new technology is really important.
It's really important as well. And I've completely appreciate how these technologies bring those ecosystems closer to me, very, very selfishly. You can fly around digital twins of forests that you'd never be able to see in person. And it's just a really cool thing to have access to, speaking as the privileged person with 2 mobile phones and 2 laptops in front of her, that I can now reach those spaces because of this digital technology in those communities. So yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think you're right. Like, it really connects consumers in different parts of the world with these areas, right? One example, what you said just reminded me of Ecuador, where we partnered with Lavazza, an Italian coffee company. And, we empowered the local farmers and the co-ops to start to record their deforestation-free coffee and information around it. And nowadays, you can put on a QR code on the coffee bag so that if a consumer tries to look at the QR code, they can actually see where it's coming from. And that kind of cutting out of this distance to where your food is coming from or where your fashion is coming from, that's something that I think as a global community, we can also try to work on more. I think, again, combining our different strengths in developing countries and also partnerships with corporations, and also some of us working on more global supply chains or systems.
Yeah. So in some ways, we are also victims of the digital divide that's keeping us from accessing that information and that connection to the things that support and enable our lives and food we eat even.
Mm-hmm.
That's all been really interesting. Are there any other thoughts or things you want to leave us with today?
Yes, I just wanted to share, we recently published a white paper called Nature ID as Digital Public Infrastructure. And I'd love if you can read it and discuss more. We're considering a new concept called the Nature ID. Can we give landscapes some kind of identification and start to collect different types of environmental data around it on biodiversity or water quality, soil, climate, stewardships, land ownership, and look at environment in a multidimensional way, not just about carbon or about biomass. And, we're thinking that this can really solve a lot of the issues we've been hearing around how do we measure and verify different green financing mechanisms like the payment for environmental service or green bonds, results-based payments, as well as give this as information to banks or businesses for decision making. And it could also be used for environmental justice, trying to prove what the value of nature is. So we're really looking forward to how countries can build such data exchange, digital public infrastructure in the coming years. It's a white paper. So again, it's really open for discussion. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. It's great. Something to dig a bit deeper into, because the conversation, of course, will continue. In fact, it will continue on this podcast because you mentioned AI, and I didn't ask any follow-up questions, despite how important it is, because we're going to have a whole episode on that topic. It's so huge. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Nature Unheard, where we dive into the big questions shaping our planet's future. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you listen so that you don't miss an episode. And if you can't get enough of us, we're at EBRD_official on Instagram or at EBRD on X and Blue Sky. This podcast was made possible thanks to our EBRD donors. It was produced by Olga Aristedo and Cecilia Calatrava from EBRD, with production support from Bespoken Media. Till next time, bye! Palmear was supported for the EBRD's Star Venture programme, with funding for this project provided by the United States. The programme helps high-potential startups grow and strengthens entrepreneurial ecosystems across our regions. Another key technology programme by the EBRD is its environmental technology transfer, with the Global Environment Facility's support. It aims to accelerate the adoption of advanced solutions for sustainability.